The crystal chandeliers sparkled above the crowd like 1,000 tiny stars. Victoria Ashford stood near the tall windows of her penthouse, watching the city lights below while pretending to listen to a conversation about stock markets. She wore a dress that cost more than most people made in 3 months, but she barely thought about it. Money had stopped meaning anything to her years ago. Tonight was her annual charity gala. The same people, the same conversations, the same fake smiles. Victoria had built her tech company from nothing and sold it for billions. Now she spent her time hosting events like this, writing checks to causes she barely remembered, and collecting praise from people who wanted her money. Her housekeeper, Maria, had been working overtime all week to prepare for tonight. The woman was in her 50s with tired eyes and hands that showed years of hard work. She'd been cleaning Victoria's homes for almost 8 years now. Reliable, quiet, almost invisible, which was exactly how Victoria preferred her staff. Tonight, Maria had brought her son to help with the serving. Victoria had met him once or twice before, maybe. A teenage boy with dark curly hair and nervous eyes. He wore black pants and a white shirt that looked a bit too big for his thin frame. Victoria couldn't remember his name. Daniel? David? It didn't really matter. The boy carried trays of champagne through the crowd, keeping his head down. Victoria noticed how uncomfortable he looked, how he seemed to shrink whenever one of her guests reached for a glass without even glancing at him. It was like he was a robot, not a person. Just a function, Victoria, darling. A woman in emerald green swept over, air kissing both her cheeks. This is absolutely magnificent. You always throw the most wonderful parties. Victoria smiled the smile she'd perfected over years of these events. I'm so glad you could make it, Patricia. They talked about nothing for 10 minutes. Patricia's new vacation home, her daughter's engagement, the upcoming opera season. Victoria's mind wandered. She glanced at her watch. The pianist should have been here 30 minutes ago. Her assistant rushed over, phone pressed to her ear, panic written across her face. Victoria excused herself from Patricia and stepped aside. What's wrong? The pianist canceled, her assistant whispered urgently. Car accident. He's fine, but he can't make it. I've called everyone I know and nobody's available on such short notice. Victoria felt her stomach drop. The entire evening was planned around live music during dinner. Her guests expected perfection. They'd talk if something went wrong. They always did. Figure it out, Victoria said coldly. I don't care how. We need music in 20 minutes. Her assistant nodded and hurried away, phone already back at her ear. Victoria took a long sip of wine and forced her shoulders to relax. This was fine. Everything would be fine, but 20 minutes later, nothing was fine. Her assistant returned with apologetic eyes and empty hands. Every professional pianist in the city was either booked or too far away to arrive in time. Victoria looked across the room at her Steinway grand piano. It had cost her a small fortune, shipped from Germany, perfectly tuned every month. And tonight it would sit there silent, a useless decoration, while her guests whispered about her inability to manage a simple dinner party. The crowd was moving toward the dining room. She needed a solution now. That's when she saw him, Maria's son, passing by with an empty tray, heading back toward the kitchen. A memory flickered in her mind, something Maria had mentioned months ago while dusting the bookshelves. Her son played piano, or maybe it was guitar, some instrument. Victoria stepped in front of him. The boy nearly ran into her, stopping just in time, eyes wide. You play piano, don't you? Victoria asked. It came out more like a command than a question. The boy blinked. Yes, ma'am. A little. Perfect. I need you to play during dinner. She gestured toward the Steinway. Nothing complicated. Just some background music. Can you do that? His face went pale. Mrs. Ashford, I'm not asking for a concert. Just play something pleasant. Anything. Victoria softened her voice slightly, remembering to seem kind. You'd be helping me out tremendously. The boy looked toward the kitchen, probably searching for his mother. Victoria didn't have time for this. I'll pay you extra, of course, she added. Money solved everything. It's not about money, he said quietly. I've never played for people like this. People like this. Victoria bristled at the phrase but kept her smile in place. It's just background music. No one will really be listening. They'll be too busy eating and talking. She watched him struggle with the decision. His hands tightened around the tray. Finally, he nodded, just barely. Good. You'll start in 5 minutes. Victoria turned away before he could change his mind. She found Maria in the kitchen checking on the appetizers. "Your son is going to play piano for us tonight. I hope that's all right." Maria's eyes widened. "Daniel, Mrs. Ashford, It's fine. Just background music." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Consider it a bonus opportunity for him." She walked away before Maria could protest further. Problem solved. The guests settled into their seats in the dining room. The long table gleamed with silver and crystal. Flower arrangements perfumed the air. Everything was perfect except for the silence where music should be. Victoria watched as Daniel walked slowly to the piano. He looked so small next to the massive instrument. His worn sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor. A few guests glanced over with mild curiosity before returning to their conversations. Daniel sat on the bench and adjusted it slightly. His hands rested on his knees for a moment. Victoria could see him take a deep breath. Just play something simple, she thought. Moonlight Sonata, for Elise, something everyone knows. The first course was being served. Conversations filled the room with comfortable noise. Victoria relaxed into her chair at the head of the table. This would work. The boy would play some simple tune. Dinner would proceed smoothly, and no one would remember that anything had almost gone wrong. Daniel's hands moved to the keys. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. Victoria picked up her fork, ready to focus on her meal and her guests. But then something changed. The music shifted, grew stronger. It wasn't any song Victoria recognized. The melody was haunting, beautiful in a way that made her chest feel tight. It climbed and fell like a story being told without words. Around the table, conversations began to fade. Forks paused halfway to mouths. People turned in their seats to look at the piano. Victoria set down her wine glass. She couldn't look away. This wasn't background music. This was something else entirely. The boy played like he'd forgotten where he was. His eyes were closed, his whole body moving with the music. The notes poured out of him like they'd been trapped inside for years, finally finding release. The room had gone completely silent, except for the piano. Even the servers stood still, frozen in place. Victoria felt something uncomfortable stirring in her chest. Was it anger? Embarrassment? She couldn't quite name it. This was supposed to be simple background music. Instead, this boy, this nobody, this help, was commanding the attention of every person in her dining room. When the final note faded into silence, no one moved. The quiet stretched on for what felt like forever. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause. Daniel opened his eyes, looking startled as if he'd forgotten anyone else was there. His face flushed red. Victoria clapped too because everyone was watching her, but her smile felt frozen on her face. "That'll be all," she said, her voice cutting through the applause. "Thank you. You can go help your mother now." The boy stood quickly, almost knocking over the bench. He hurried out of the room with his head down. Victoria picked up her fork again. "Shall we continue with dinner?" But she could still hear that music in her head, and she didn't like it at all. Daniel's hands were shaking as he pushed through the kitchen door. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. What had he just done? He'd played one of his own pieces in front of all those people. Rich people who probably went to actual concerts and knew real music. His mother grabbed his arm the moment he entered. "Daniel, that was beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that?" He couldn't answer. His throat felt too tight. Maria squeezed his shoulder once, then had to rush back out with the next course. Daniel stood there alone, trying to steady his breathing. Meanwhile, in the dining room, Victoria was losing control of her own party. A man in an expensive suit had left his seat and was walking toward her. She recognized him immediately. James Chen. He owned one of the biggest music production companies in the country. She'd invited him hoping he'd donate to her arts foundation. "Victoria," James said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Who was that young man?" "The pianist?" Victoria dabbed her napkin at the corner of her mouth, buying herself a second. "Oh, just my housekeeper's son. I needed someone to fill in last minute. He's extraordinary." "That composition was entirely original, wasn't it?" "I've never heard anything like it." "I'm sure he learned it from somewhere," Victoria said smoothly. "YouTube, probably. These kids can memorize anything these days." James shook his head. "No, that was original work. I've been in this business for 25 years. I know real talent when I hear it. He glanced toward the kitchen door. Is he here? Can I speak with him? Victoria felt that uncomfortable feeling again, stronger this time. She forced a laugh. James, really, he's here to work, not to network. I'm sure he's flattered, but let's not make him uncomfortable. I'd like to give him my card at least. Does he study somewhere? Juilliard? Curtis? I have no idea. Probably just high school. Victoria picked up her wine glass. You know how it is with these things. Lots of kids play piano. It doesn't mean anything. But James wasn't listening anymore. He was already walking toward the kitchen. Victoria's jaw tightened. She stood up, following him. This was her home. Her event. She wasn't going to let some producer disrupt her entire evening over a servant's child. In the kitchen, Maria was plating desserts with 2 other servers. James pushed through the door with Victoria right behind him. Excuse me, James said to Maria. The young man who was playing piano. Is he your son? Maria looked terrified, her eyes darting to Victoria. Yes, sir. I'm so sorry if he disturbed anyone. He was just trying to help. Disturbed? No. James pulled out his wallet and handed Maria a business card. Your son is incredibly talented. I'd love to talk with him about his music. Does he study somewhere? Maria held the card like it might burn her. He teaches himself, from books and videos online. James's eyebrows shot up. He's self-taught? That piece he played was self-taught? He writes his own songs, Maria said quietly. Since he was little. We have an old keyboard at home. It's broken, but he makes it work. Victoria watched James's face transform. He looked like someone had just told him he'd won the lottery. This is incredible, James breathed. I'm sorry, what's your name? Maria Santos. Mrs. Santos, your son has a gift. A real, genuine gift. With proper training, he could be... James stopped himself, shaking his head in amazement. Where is he? I'd really like to speak with him. Daniel had been standing in the corner by the refrigerator, hoping to disappear. Now everyone was looking at him. Hi, James said, walking over with his hand extended. I'm James Chen. That was one of the most beautiful things I've heard in years. Did you really write that yourself? Daniel shook his hand, barely making eye contact. Yes, sir. Remarkable. Truly remarkable. How long have you been composing? Since I was 12, I guess. Maybe younger. Victoria couldn't stand it anymore. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. James, this is very kind of you, but I don't think you understand the situation. These families... She gestured vaguely at Maria and Daniel. They're not from our world. People approach them with promises all the time. It usually doesn't end well. James frowned at her. Victoria, I'm not trying to scam anyone. I'm trying to help nurture an incredible talent. I'm sure you are. But Daniel needs to focus on school, on practical things. Music is a lovely hobby, but it's not realistic for someone in his position. Victoria turned to Maria. I'm just trying to protect you. You understand that, don't you? Maria nodded slowly, even though her eyes looked sad. She needed this job. She needed Victoria's approval. Mrs. Ashford is probably right, Maria said softly to James. Daniel has school and work. We don't really have time for music lessons or anything like that. I'm not talking about lessons, James said. I'm talking about a career. Your son could... James. Victoria's voice turned cold. That's enough. You're making them uncomfortable. Please return to your seat. Dessert is about to be served. For a moment, James looked like he might argue. Then he glanced at Maria's frightened face and seemed to understand. He nodded slowly. Of course. I apologize. He looked at Daniel one more time. If you ever want to talk, my information is on that card. Anytime. He walked back to the dining room. Victoria waited a moment before following. Maria, she said quietly. I know that seemed exciting, but trust me. I've worked with hundreds of musicians through my foundation. The industry chews people up and spits them out. especially people who don't have connections or money to fall back on. I'm not being cruel. I'm being realistic. Yes, Mrs. Ashford, thank you. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. Victoria walked back to her guests, feeling strangely unsettled. She should feel good. She'd protected her employee from false hope. She'd maintained order at her event. So why did she feel like she'd just done something wrong? The rest of the dinner passed smoothly. People complimented the food, the wine, the view. Several guests mentioned the pianist. Where did you find him? They asked. He was incredible. Just lucky, Victoria said each time, smiling. But James didn't speak to her for the rest of the evening. He left early, barely saying goodbye. After the last guest departed, Victoria stood alone in her living room. The cleaning crew was already at work. Through the kitchen door, she could hear Maria giving Daniel instructions to carry bags to their car. Victoria walked to the piano. She touched the keys, pressing one down softly. It made a single, lonely note. She didn't know why she felt angry. At James for disrupting her evening. At Daniel for playing so well. At herself, though she couldn't quite figure out why. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant with links to social media posts. Victoria clicked the first one. It was a video. Shaky phone footage of Daniel at the piano taken by one of her guests. The caption read, "Most incredible moment at tonight's gala. Who is this young genius?" The video already had thousands of views. Victoria scrolled through the comments. Everyone was asking the same questions. Who was he? Where did he train? When could they hear more? She clicked to another post. Same video, more views, and another. The footage was spreading. Victoria set down her phone and poured herself a drink. Tomorrow, she'd call her publicist. They'd handle this. They'd make it go away. But as she stood there in her empty penthouse, surrounded by expensive things that suddenly felt meaningless, she couldn't stop hearing that music in her head. And she couldn't shake the look on Daniel's face when she'd sent him away. Like she'd just closed a door he'd been hoping would open. Victoria finished her drink and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. And when it did, she dreamed of music. She couldn't quite remember when she woke up. 3 weeks passed, and Victoria tried to forget about that night. She had other things to focus on. Board meetings, investment opportunities, another charity event next month. But the internet had not forgotten about Daniel. The video from her gala had gone viral, completely, unexpectedly viral. Millions of views across different platforms. Classical music blogs were analyzing his composition. Reddit threads were trying to identify him. Someone had even created a fan page called Find the Mystery Pianist. Victoria's publicist had called it an unexpected PR win for her foundation. But Victoria didn't feel like she was winning anything. She was in her office when her assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Ashford, there's something you should see." Victoria looked up from her laptop. "What is it?" Classical Music Today just published an article. Well, you should read it." Her assistant handed her a tablet. The headline made Victoria's stomach sink. "The mystery pianist identified. Meet Daniel Santos, self-taught prodigy working as wait staff." The article had everything. Daniel's full name, his age, where he went to school, a photo of him in his school orchestra holding a violin because the school didn't have enough piano spots. And worse, much worse, it had quotes from people in the classical music community. "This is the kind of raw talent we see once in a generation," one famous conductor was quoted saying. "The fact that he's had no formal training makes it even more extraordinary." The article went on. It mentioned that Daniel had applied to Juilliard last year and been accepted. But he hadn't been able to attend because even with scholarships, his family couldn't afford the living expenses, books, and other costs. Victoria's hands tightened on the tablet. The article ended with a question that made her feel sick. If billionaires like Victoria Ashford fund music programs for elite students, why did this talent slip through the cracks? Why was Daniel serving champagne instead of receiving the training he deserves? Victoria set down the tablet. "Get me Robert on the phone." Robert was her public relations director. He answered on the second ring. I saw the article, he said before she could speak. We need to get ahead of this. How bad is it? People are asking questions on social media. Why you didn't help him. Why you sent him back to the kitchen. A few videos from the gala show that interaction, by the way. Where you dismissed him after he played. Victoria closed her eyes. Of course someone had filmed that too. What do they want? Money? I'll write a check to the kid. It's not about a check anymore, Victoria. It's about the story. Rich billionaire overlooks poor genius working in her own home. It's not a good look. So what do I do? Robert was quiet for a moment. Honestly, you could do nothing and wait for it to blow over. These things usually do, or what? Or you could actually help him. Make it real. But it has to be genuine, not just damage control. Victoria thanked him and hung up. She sat in her office for a long time, staring at nothing. She didn't want to admit it. But she knew the truth. She had dismissed Daniel, not because he wasn't talented, because he was. And that had made her uncomfortable in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. Meanwhile, across the city in a small apartment in Queens, Daniel's life had turned completely upside down. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing in 3 days. Friend requests, messages from strangers, news outlets wanting interviews, music schools reaching out. It was overwhelming. His mother was scared. Don't talk to anyone, she kept saying. We don't know what they want. But James Chen had kept his word. He'd been calling Maria every few days, always respectful, never pushy. Finally, she agreed to let him visit their apartment. James arrived on a Saturday morning with coffee and bagels. Their apartment was small, clean, filled with the smell of Maria's cooking. Family photos covered one wall. A tiny keyboard sat on a desk in Daniel's room, half the keys making no sound when pressed. This is where you compose? James asked, looking at the broken instrument. Daniel nodded, embarrassed. I know it's not much. I use music software on my phone too when I need to hear all the notes. James sat down on Daniel's bed. Can I be honest with you both? Maria and Daniel exchanged nervous looks. I've spent 25 years in the music industry. I've worked with people who had every advantage. Private tutors since age 3. Instruments worth more than cars. The best schools money could buy. James looked at Daniel. And I've never heard anyone play like you did that night. What you have isn't something that can be taught. It's something you're born with. Mr. Chen, Maria started, we appreciate your kindness, but please let me finish. I know you're worried. I know Mrs. Ashford warned you about people like me, and she's right to be cautious. This industry has a lot of sharks. James leaned forward. But Daniel, you got into Juilliard. Do you know how many people auditioned for that program? Thousands. And they accepted you. That wasn't luck. Daniel's voice was quiet. Doesn't matter. We can't afford it. What if you could? What if there was a way? We're not looking for handouts, Maria said firmly. Not a handout. An investment. I want to mentor you, Daniel. Help you apply to programs with full funding. Connect you with people who can make a real difference. And I want to record some of your compositions. Not for money right now. Just to get your work out there. To show people what you can do. Daniel looked at his mother. She looked torn, scared, hopeful all at once. Why? Maria asked. Why do you care so much? James smiled sadly. Because 30 years ago I was him. Poor kid from a poor family who loved music more than anything, and someone gave me a chance. I've spent my whole career looking for someone worth passing that forward to. Daniel is that person. Maria's eyes filled with tears. We can't pay you back. We don't have anything. I don't want anything except to see what he becomes. James stood up. Think about it. Take your time. But please don't let fear stop something beautiful from happening. After James left, Maria and Daniel sat in silence for a long time. What do you want to do? Maria finally asked. Daniel looked at his broken keyboard. I want to try, Mom. I'm so tired of pretending I don't want this. Maria hugged him tight. Okay, we'll try. That same day, James started making calls. He reached out to programs, professors, foundations. He posted Daniel's video on his professional accounts with his full endorsement. The response was immediate and overwhelming, but Victoria didn't know any of this yet. She was still sitting in her office trying to decide what to do. Her phone rang. It was her oldest friend, Catherine, who never called unless something was important. Have you seen what they're saying about you online? Catherine asked. I know. It's being handled. Victoria, I've known you for 30 years. This isn't you. You're not cruel. You're not heartless. So why did you do it? Why did you turn that boy away? Victoria opened her mouth to defend herself but found she had no words. I don't know, she finally admitted. I really don't know. Then maybe it's time to figure it out. Before you become the person everyone thinks you are. After Catherine hung up, Victoria sat in the silence of her enormous office. She thought about Daniel at her piano, the way the music had made her feel, the way she'd felt threatened by a 17-year-old boy with a broken keyboard. She opened her laptop and searched for Daniel's name. The videos, the articles, the comments, thousands of people celebrating his talent, and scattered among them questions about her, criticism, disappointment. Victoria closed the laptop. She picked up her phone and called Maria. It rang 4 times before Maria answered, her voice cautious. Hello? Maria, it's Victoria Ashford. I'd like to speak with you and your son. Are you available tomorrow? There was a long pause. May I ask what this is about? Victoria took a breath. I'd like to apologize. And then I'd like to help, if you'll let me. Maria and Daniel sat in Victoria's living room, the same room where the gala had been held. Everything looked different in daylight. Less glamorous. Just expensive furniture in an empty space. Daniel's leg bounced nervously. Maria kept her purse clutched tight on her lap, like she might need to run at any moment. They'd almost not come. Maria had stared at her phone for an hour after Victoria's call, trying to decide if this was a good idea. Victoria entered carrying a tray with coffee and pastries. She set it on the table between them, and Maria noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Thank you for coming, Victoria said, sitting down across from them. She looked different, too. No makeup, hair pulled back simply. She looked older, more human. Mrs. Ashford, Maria started. If this is about me keeping my job, I understand. It's not about your job. Your job is secure no matter what happens in this conversation. Victoria took a breath. I owe you both an apology. Actually, I owe Daniel much more than that. Daniel glanced at his mother, confused. Victoria continued, her voice careful. That night at the gala, you played something extraordinary. And instead of recognizing it, I dismissed you. I sent you back to the kitchen like you were nothing. And then when James Chen wanted to help you, I got in the way. You were trying to protect us, Maria said quietly. You said so. Is that what I said? Victoria smiled sadly. Maria, I've been lying to myself about this for weeks. I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself. I don't understand, Daniel said. Victoria looked at him directly for the first time. I've spent millions of dollars on music education. I've funded programs at the best schools. I sit on boards. I host fundraisers, and I thought that made me a good person. Someone who cares about art and talent. She paused, her voice getting quieter. But when real talent was standing right in front of me playing my piano, I didn't see it. Or maybe I did see it, and that's what scared me. Because if I saw it, I'd have to admit something terrible. What? Maria asked. That all my charity work, all my donations, they go to people who already have advantages. Rich kids who can afford the application fees, the audition travel, the expensive instruments. Kids from families who know how to navigate the system. Victoria's eyes were red. I've never actually helped anyone who truly needed it. Not really. The room was silent except for the sound of traffic far below. And you, Victoria looked at Daniel. You represented everything I'd failed to see. Real talent that had been invisible to people like me. And instead of being amazed or humbled, I felt threatened. Like you were showing me who I really am. Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd been expecting Victoria to offer them money or make some kind of deal. He hadn't expected this. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me, Victoria continued. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. And because I want to do better, if you'll let me. Maria's grip on her purse loosened slightly. What does that mean? I know James Chen has been in contact with you. He's a good man. Better than me, honestly. But I'd like to help too. Not instead of him. With him. Victoria leaned forward. Daniel, I want to fund your education. Completely. Tuition, housing, books, instruments, everything. Not as charity. As an investment in something real. Daniel's heart started racing. Why would you do that? Because it's right. And because I'm tired of pretending to care about music while ignoring musicians. Victoria pulled out a folder from beside her chair. I've been doing research. Real research, not just writing checks. There are hundreds of talented kids who slip through the cracks every year. Kids like you who have the skill but not the money or connections. She opened the folder, showing them papers covered in notes. I want to start a real scholarship program. Not for rich kids who need a tax break for their parents. For kids who work after school and teach themselves on broken keyboards. But I can't do it alone. I don't know that world. I don't know what those kids actually need. Victoria looked at Daniel. I was hoping you might help me understand, so we can help others like you. Maria's eyes were filling with tears. Mrs. Ashford, this is very generous, but I know what you're thinking, Victoria interrupted gently. That this is about my image. That I'm just trying to fix my reputation after those articles. She shook her head. Maybe that's part of it. I won't lie. But mostly it's because I looked in the mirror after that night and I didn't like who I saw. Daniel finally spoke. I already talked to Mr. Chen. He's helping me apply to programs. I know. He called me yesterday. Daniel's eyebrows shot up.
He did?
Victoria nodded. He wanted to make sure I wasn't going to cause problems. We had a long conversation. He told me about your Juilliard acceptance, about why you couldn't go, about the online forums where people have been following your compositions for months under a username. She smiled slightly. You're kind of famous in the classical music world, apparently. Just nobody knew who you actually were. I didn't think anyone really listened to those, Daniel admitted. Thousands of people listened. They just didn't know they were listening to a teenager from Queens. Victoria pulled out another paper. James sent me this. It's a comment from a music professor in Boston. She said your work reminded her why she became a teacher. That it had been years since she'd heard something that made her feel the way music made her feel when she was young. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He'd read comments on his posts, but they were just words on a screen. Hearing them read out loud in Victoria's living room made them real in a way they hadn't been before. The point is, Victoria said, you have a gift, a real one, and I want to help you develop it. Not because of the articles or the criticism. Because it's the first real thing I've had a chance to do in years. Maria wiped her eyes. What would this mean exactly? It means Daniel could attend any music program that accepts him. Full funding. No loans, no debt. He could focus on his music instead of working 3 jobs like you do. Victoria's voice softened. It means you could stop cleaning houses 16 hours a day. I'd pay you a salary, a real one, to coordinate the scholarship program. Because you understand what these families need better than anyone I could hire. Maria shook her head in disbelief. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about running programs. You raised a genius on minimum wage. You kept him in school, kept him fed, kept him believing in himself. That's harder than any MBA. Victoria smiled. I have accountants and lawyers. What I need is someone who actually knows what poverty looks like, what barriers these kids really face. Daniel looked at his mother. He could see her struggling, wanting to believe this was real but afraid to hope. Can we think about it? Maria asked. Of course. Take all the time you need, Victoria stood up. But Daniel, regardless of what you decide about my help, promise me something. What? Don't stop playing. Don't stop composing. The world needs your music. I just wish I'd been smart enough to see that from the beginning. As they left, Victoria walked them to the door. Maria, one more thing. You're not fired. You never were. But you shouldn't have to clean my house to feed your family. That was always wrong, even before I knew about Daniel. In the elevator going down, Maria and Daniel didn't speak. They were both too overwhelmed. Finally, Daniel said, Do you think she means it? Maria thought about Victoria's face, the way her hands had shaken, the research folder filled with notes. I think she's trying to, Maria said. Maybe that's enough. They stepped out onto the street. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from James. Call me when you can. I have news about Curtis Institute. Daniel showed his mother. She laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. Your life is changing, Maria said. Daniel looked up at Victoria's building, then back at his mother. Our lives are changing. Above them, Victoria stood at her window watching them walk away. She'd made the offer. Now she had to prove she meant it. Not just to them, but to herself. She turned back to her empty apartment and started making phone calls. Real ones this time. To people who could actually help make this happen. For the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was doing something that mattered. 1 year later, Victoria sat in a concert hall she'd been to 100 times before. But tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't in the VIP box overlooking the stage. She was in the fourth row, surrounded by regular people who'd bought regular tickets. The woman next to her was reading the program. It says this composer is only 18. Can you imagine? Writing something that gets performed at Carnegie Hall at 18? Victoria smiled but didn't say anything. She just looked at the stage, waiting. The year had been harder than she'd expected. After that meeting with Maria and Daniel, Victoria had thrown herself into creating a real scholarship program. Not the kind where wealthy families get tax breaks. The kind that found kids who couldn't afford application fees. Kids who'd never been to a concert because tickets cost too much. Kids who practiced on borrowed instruments and taught themselves from library books. She'd hired Maria to help run it. At first, Maria had been terrified, sure she'd mess everything up. But she hadn't. She understood these families in ways Victoria never could. She knew which questions to ask, which barriers were real, which problems needed solving first. Together, they'd found 12 students in that first year, 12 kids who had talent but no path forward. They were scattered across different schools now, different programs, different cities. But they all had something they hadn't had before, a real chance. Daniel had been accepted to Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. Full scholarship from Victoria's fund, plus a stipend for living expenses. James Chen had become his mentor, helping him navigate the music world, introducing him to people who mattered. But Daniel had almost not gone. Victoria remembered that phone call 2 months after their meeting. Daniel had called her himself, not his mother. "I don't think I can do this," he'd said, his voice shaking. "Everyone at Curtis, they've been training their whole lives. They've had private teachers since they were 5. I'm going to show up and everyone will know I don't belong." Victoria had been in a meeting when he called. She'd left the room to talk to him. "Do you remember what you played at my gala?" she'd asked. "Of course. That wasn't training. That wasn't technique someone taught you. That was you. Your voice. Your story." Victoria had looked out her office window at the city below. Those other students have had every advantage. But they haven't had to fight for it like you have. They haven't had to want it so badly that they kept going even when it seemed impossible. That's not a weakness, Daniel. That's your strength. What if I fail? Then you fail. And you get back up. But you're not going to fail. Victoria had smiled even though he couldn't see her. "And if you do, you know where to find me." He'd gone to Curtis, and from what James told her, he'd struggled at first. The other students had technical skills that Daniel didn't have. Years of proper training that showed in their precision, their polish. But Daniel had something they didn't have. A rawness. An honesty in his music that came from living a life most of them couldn't imagine. His compositions didn't sound like anyone else's. They sounded like truth. By winter, his professors were talking about him as one of the most promising students they'd seen in decades. By spring, he'd been invited to compose a piece for tonight's concert. Victoria looked at the program in her hands. New Voices, a concert of emerging composers. Daniel's piece was listed third. Broken Keys, it was called. Dedicated to my mother and to second chances. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Victoria's heart was racing. The first 2 pieces were beautiful. Technically perfect. Impressive. But they washed over Victoria without leaving much behind. Then Daniel walked onto the stage. He looked different than he had a year ago. Taller somehow, though he probably hadn't grown. More confident in the way he moved. He wore a suit that actually fit him, bought with his first stipend check. His mother had cried when she saw him in it. Daniel sat at the piano. The same kind of Steinway that Victoria had in her penthouse. The one where this had all started. He placed his hands on the keys and took a breath. The first notes were soft, tentative. Like someone touching something they weren't sure they were allowed to touch. It reminded Victoria of that night, watching him sit at her piano with those worn sneakers looking terrified. Then the music grew. It climbed and swelled, telling a story without words. Victoria could hear struggle in it. She could hear hope and frustration and determination. She could hear a broken keyboard in a small apartment, a teenager refusing to give up on something everyone told him was impossible. Around her, the audience was completely still. The woman next to Victoria had stopped reading her program. Everyone had. The music shifted again, becoming something lighter. Not happy exactly, but open. Like a door opening after being closed for a long time. Like possibility. Victoria felt tears running down her face and didn't bother wiping them away. When the final notes faded, there was silence. That same silence that had filled her dining room a year ago. The silence of people trying to hold on to something beautiful for just a moment longer. Then the applause started. It built and built until the entire hall was on its feet. Victoria stood with them, clapping until her hands hurt. Daniel stood and bowed. He looked out at the audience, and Victoria could see he was crying too. Happy tears this time. After the concert, there was a reception in the lobby. Victoria had been invited, but she stayed back watching from a distance. Daniel was surrounded by people. Professors, critics, other musicians. James Chen stood nearby, beaming with pride. Maria was there too, wearing a new dress, looking overwhelmed and joyful. She kept touching Daniel's arm like she needed to make sure he was real. Victoria started to leave. This was their moment. She didn't need to be part of it, Mrs. Ashford. She turned. Daniel had broken away from the crowd and was walking toward her. You came, he said. Of course I came. I wouldn't have missed it, Daniel smiled. I saw you crying during my piece, Victoria laughed, embarrassed. It was beautiful, Daniel. Truly beautiful. I wanted to thank you for everything. For the scholarship, for believing in the program, for... Stop. Victoria held up her hand. You don't owe me thanks. If anything, I owe you. For what? Victoria looked at him, this young man who'd changed her life by playing a piano at a party. For reminding me what matters. For showing me that real art comes from real life. For making me want to be better than I was. Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he just hugged her. It surprised them both. Come meet some people, Daniel said when they separated. There's a professor here from Berkeley. And a composer from the New York Phil. They all want to talk about the scholarship program. About finding more students like me. Victoria followed him into the crowd. Maria saw her and smiled, mouthing thank you across the room, but Victoria shook her head. The thanks went both ways. Later that night, back in her penthouse, Victoria sat at her piano. She pressed a single key, listening to the note hang in the air. She thought about the 12 students they'd helped this year. About the 20 they were hoping to help next year. About all the broken keyboards in small apartments, all the kids who deserved a chance. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Mom wants to know if you're free for dinner next week. Her place. She's cooking. Victoria smiled and texted back. I'd love that. She looked around her empty apartment. It was the same penthouse, the same expensive furniture, the same view of the city, but it felt different now. Less empty. Less cold. Because she'd learned something important over the past year. Wealth wasn't about how much money you had. It was about what you did with it. And charity wasn't about funding institutions that already had everything. It was about seeing people who'd been invisible. Helping voices that deserved to be heard. Daniel had taught her that. Him and his broken keyboard and his refusal to stop believing in something that seemed impossible. Victoria stood and went to her desk. She opened her laptop and started writing. Another email to another school district. Asking about students who might need help. Another message to another music teacher, looking for kids who'd been overlooked. There was so much work to do, so many talents waiting to be discovered, so many doors that needed opening. But for the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was doing something real, something that would matter long after she was gone. She thought about Daniel on that stage tonight, about the music he'd created from nothing, about the journey he still had ahead of him. And she smiled, knowing she'd been lucky enough to be part of it. Not because she'd written a check, but because she'd finally learned to see. To really see. That was the greatest gift of all.